All right, Shalom. First and foremost, as always, I'd like to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Racha HaKodash. Double honors unto the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, who will well. Salutations to you, sincere, hopeful, elect Akim, pushing the word of Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, in spirit and in truth, coming at you with another lesson through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai. And in this lesson, I want to get into, or I believe I'll title this lesson, I see why the Lord put us in slavery. All right. Um, if you were to ask the average so-called Negro, Latino, or Native American, is the Most High just for putting us in captivity? Is that fair? Is that righteous? Is that equal? And a lot of Israelites wouldn't have a concrete answer for that, or they might feel, that it's unfair that we, have been subject to captivity and the treatment which we've been forced to endure, for hundreds of years. However, what they don't realize and understand is that when you really go into the scriptures and read about our history and what our kings were doing, whether they were the Southern Kingdom or Northern Kingdom, the things that our kings were doing, and by default, the two kingdoms, the Northern and the Southern Kingdom, the inhabitants of those kingdoms, were doing just as much wickedness as, the rulers. All right. And when you read what the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah were doing, I see why the Lord put our people in captivity. That was the final straw. A people that's supposed to be holy and set apart have become so wicked that the only way they will be corrected is through totally stripping them of any mental recollection of who they are for a long period of time, and allowing Esau to be the whooping stick to bring holy hell on them. Okay, so this is starting here with Proverbs 3 in verse 31. I'm gonna read both KJV and NLT. So in the KJV it reads, envy thou not the oppressor, and choose none of his ways. NLT, don't envy violent people, which Esau and these other nations by default are violent people. Okay, Israel were a peaceful people, yet envying the violent, we have, took on their customs and their ways and become more evil, and violent than them. Okay, so don't envy violent people or copy their ways. Okay, so we are not to copy the heathen. All right, now this is Exodus 26 and verse 30 in the KJV and NLT. And just follow me, I'll get to the point. Verse 30 in the KJV says, and thou shalt rear up the tabernacle according to the fashion thereof, which was showed thee in the mount. NLT says, set up this tabernacle according to the pattern you were shown on the mountain. Now, when you go into Exodus chapters 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, it goes into how the Heavenly Father wanted the tabernacle set up, the materials used, the colors. All right, it goes into the priest's garments. All right, what was to be the type of incense burn, oils, things pertaining to the priesthood, so on and so forth. Okay. Those details can be found in, Exodus 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. Okay. So the Heavenly Father gave Moses the example of what he wanted the tabernacle and things pertaining to the tabernacle to be fashioned after. And that in itself is to stand for, for eternity. Or at no point in time was that, okay, it's not going to be good enough, and, things need to be tweaked. All right, do away with this, take this away, and put and replace it with this. All right, this fashion is not suitable anymore. Do away with that fashion and fashion it like this. All right, nowhere in the scriptures does it go into anything such as that. All right, which leads me to 2 Kings, the 16th chapter, and I'm gonna read the whole chapter, and I'm gonna read it in the NLT. All right. Now, once again, we are not to envy the heathen, all right, the oppressor, and we are not to choose any of his ways. All right. In that particular points in history, you've had certain nations of the heathen that were the main oppressors of the Israelites, whether it was the northern kingdom or the southern kingdom, a specific kingdom such as the Assyrians oppressing the northern kingdom, or the Babylonians oppressing the southern kingdom, at different points in time, and so on and so forth. All right, so you're not supposed to envy the heathen, aka the oppressor, nor choose any of his ways. Okay, and then once again, the fashion of the tabernacle in things pertaining to the tabernacle, we're supposed to be adhered to based upon what Moses received from the Heavenly Father. Okay, so here in 2 Kings 16:1, it says, Ahaz, son of Jotham, began to rule over Judah in the 17th year of King Pekah's reign in Israel. Okay, so you had Pekah, the northern kingdom king, that was ruling for 17 years when Ahaz became king in Judah. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. He did not do what was pleasing in the sight of Yahweh, his power, and as his ancestor David had done. Instead, he followed the example of the kings of Israel. All right, so that there was a lot of kings, not a lot, but there were a handful of kings of the southern kingdom that actually did what was pleasing in the sight of the Heavenly Father. Meanwhile, the northern kingdom, none of them did what was pleasing in the sight of the Heavenly Father. Some did more detestable things than others. So it says, and it's crazy that this being a Southern Kingdom king was following after the shit that the Northern Kingdom kings were doing, which was they were knowingly going off. Okay. It says, instead he followed the example of the kings of Israel, even sacrificing his own son in the fire. Okay, so you had the Northern Kingdom kings that was doing shit like that, sacrificing their sons in the fire. All right, and to have a Southern Kingdom king doing that as well, as both the Northern and the Southern Kingdom were bugged out of their minds, man. Here it is, you claim to be ruling over the Heavenly Father's chosen people, and you are committing child sacrifice, man. That's some bugged out shit. Okay, that's bugged out, man. That be on along the lines of a brother in the truth claiming to be a man of the Lord in doing that. All right, child sacrifice, abortion. Okay, that ain't right, man. All right, now it is clearly understandable that the Most High had to, he had to bring heathens up against us and put us into captivity, man, as a form of punishment. Okay, because despite us having the laws, Jake was just doing whatever the hell they wanted to, man. Whatever they wanted to, whatever they felt like doing, that's what they was doing. Okay, it says, verse 3, instead, he followed the example of the kings of Israel, even sacrificing his own son in the fire. In this way, he followed the detestable practices of the pagan nations the Lord Yahweh had driven from the land ahead of the Israelites. And it was clearly stated to us that we were not to do after the customs of the Hamites that got booted out of Israel as we were coming into the land, because they got booted out for these same practices. For those detestable practices is the reason why the Heavenly Father brought that judgment upon them. Okay, and that land has to be inhabited by people that perform certain actions in righteousness in order to dwell in that land. And the Hamites were not fit for that. So us being Israelites, in order to be fit to be in that land, we had to keep the customs that the Heavenly Father gave us, the law that he gave us. And it's clear that we, north or south, was not doing that. All right, verse 4, it says, he offered sacrifices and burned incense at the pagan shrines and on the hills and under every green tree. Then King Rezin of Aram, all right, which is Syria, and King Pekah of Israel came up to attack Jerusalem. All right, so you had the king of Assyria, not Assyria, the king of Syria, and the king Pekah of the northern kingdom that had came to attack Jerusalem. All right, so they teamed up. It says they besieged Ahaz, but could not conquer him. At that time, the king of Edom recovered the town of Elath for Edom. He drove out the people of Judah and sent Edomites to live there, as they do to this day. Okay, so if you go to the modern day city of Elath in the land of Israel, guess who's going to be living there? Some Edomites. Was that this right here, verse 6 in itself proves that the people that's in the land, the people, if you went to the city of Elath currently, is going to be some Edomites there. All right, which are not the people of the Heavenly Father. Little clues like that, little things like this, for the men of the Lord, proves, who's the Israelites and who's not. All right, but that's another story, another topic. Verse 7, it says, King Ahaz sent messengers to King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria with this message: I am your servant and your vassal. Come up and rescue me from the attacking armies of Aram and Israel. All right, so you had a southern kingdom king that sent message to the king of Assyria and asked for assistance or aid or help fighting against the king of Assyria, or excuse me, the king of Syria and the king of Israel. All right. It says, then Ahaz took the silver and gold from the temple of Yahweh and the palace treasury and sent it as payment to the Assyrian king. So the king of Assyria attacked the Aramean capital of Damascus, all right, which is in Syria, and led its population away as captives, resettling them in Kir. He also killed King Rezin. King Ahaz then went to Damascus to meet with King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria. While he was there, he took special note of the altar, and this is the point. So, as the southern kingdom king Ahaz went to Damascus to meet with the king of Assyria, Tiglath-Pileser, while he was there in Damascus, this dude took special note of the altar. All right, so the altar caught his eye. All right, which really was a demon. All right, then he sent a model of the altar to Uriah the priest, along with its design in full detail. Uriah followed the king's instructions and built an altar just like it, and it was ready before the king returned from Damascus. So this nigga, okay, King Ahaz, his dumbass, was a envy. He had a, you know, pretty much envy of the altar that the Syrians had. All right, he coveted that to the point that he sent that design back to Israel and had the priests construct a replica of that, which that's going off, man, because that's not the fashion of the altar in which came from the spirit world for the Israelites to officiate the office of the priesthood with pertaining to sacrifice and whatnot. All right, so this dude was a demon, man. All right, that's crazy, man. When you just to think about it, man, it's crazy. You know, it says Uriah followed the king's instructions and built an altar just like it, and it was ready before the king returned from Damascus. When the king returned, he inspected the altar and made offerings on it. You know what I'm saying? Like this is a vexing reading this, man. Just thinking about a king being this damn rebellious and actually doing this, man. All right. Once again, I see why the Lord put Jake in slavery. Okay. You see, you go to a whole nother land where some heathens live, and the demon there is so strong it taps your pineal gland to where it's like, man, to hell with the altar that we got in Jerusalem. I like this one better. You know what? We're gonna do away with that one, and we're gonna have this one constructed. That's a demon, man. All right. It says, verse 12. It says, when the king returned, he inspected the altar and made offerings on it. He presented a burnt offering and a grain offering. He poured out a liquid offering, and he sprinkled the blood of peace offerings on the altar. Then King Ahaz removed the old bronze altar from its place in front of the Lord Yahweh's temple between the entrance and the new altar, and placed it on the north side of the new altar. All right, so just moved the bronze altar out the way, and put this heathen altar in its place. All right. He told Uriah the priest, use the new altar from the morning, for the morning sacrifices, a burnt offering, the evening grain offering, the king's burnt offering and grain offering, and the burnt offerings of all the people, as well as their grain offering and liquid offering. Sprinkle the blood from all the burnt offerings and sacrifices on the new altar. The bronze altar will be for my personal use only. Okay. Uriah the priest did as the king Ahaz commanded him. You know, and that's why the apostles say that the prophets are above the king. All right, prophets are above kings. They're above priests. Prophets being the mouthpiece of the Heavenly Father, don't they throw it off in righteousness, okay? Because they can be threatened and face death and will be obedient and steadfast in the Heavenly Father's commands. All right. Now a king, you would think that the priest would have checked, in humbleness, would have checked the king, like, hey, my lord, yeah, we shouldn't do this, you know. Yeah, we're Israelites, this is not part of our custom. This is not part of the law, so on and so forth. But, a lot of the priests were a bunch of yes men, you know, which is why that's where the prophets come into play. The prophets of Yahweh Shem Shai are not yes men. Okay, you can threaten the prophets with death. Hey, oh well. All right, I'll see you in the spirit world. Matter of fact, you'll be there before I will. That's the mindset of the prophets. Okay, that's why, here in the book of First Kings, Second Kings, you know, um, you had many prophets that were persecuted. All right, you had Elisha, Elijah. All right, that were sought after to be pretty much put to death. Certain kings, despise the counsel of the prophets, of certain prophets, because they weren't yes men. All right, and it's the same thing today. The men of Great Millstone are not yes men. All right. It says, verse 16, Uriah the priest did as the king Ahaz commanded him. Then the king removed the side panels and basins from the portable water carts. He also removed the great bronze basin called the sea from the backs of the bronze oxen and placed it on the stone pavement. In deference to the king of Assyria, he also removed the canopy that had been constructed inside the palace for use on the Sabbath day, as well as the king's outer entrance to the temple of Yahweh. So this dude was just reconstructing things according to his own will, man. All right, so you know that the Heavenly Father was not pleased with that. Okay. And this is pretty well. I'll finish it out. Verse 19. It says the rest of the events of Ahaz, the rest of the events in Ahaz's reign, and everything he did are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Judah. When Ahaz died, he was buried with his ancestors in the city of David. Then his son Hezekiah became the next king. All right, so you can clearly see this man was going off. All right, envying the heathen, desiring to be like the heathen. When you are Israelite, and the spirit of the Lord is amongst your people, but you want to fashion, certain things pertaining to the temple, in particular the altar, after what the heathen have, man. That's some bugged out shit. Bugged out. So I see why the Lord put Israel in captivity, man. So, that pretty much concludes the lesson, man. I pray this was edifying. Choose none of the oppressor's ways, man. Envy not the heathen. Okay, look at the state and situation the heathen are in currently. All right, you got a lot of these entertainers, niggas in the music industry, all facets of life, forms and fashions of life, entertainment, rapping music, basketball, sports, whatever. Politicians, all right, Negroes, so-called Latinos and natives that want to be like Esau so bad, they have made their selves detestable because they have partook in a lot of the demonic activities in which we see in the Epstein miles. Okay, so to hell with the heathen. You know, don't desire to be like them, man. All right, don't copy nothing they do, because it's all wicked. All right, so Alvarez was edifying. Till next time, shalom.